Hello everyone. In part 1, I was discussing Lord Alfred Tennyson's Ring Out Wild Bells with you. So in this video means part 2. In part 2, I'm going to continue the same. So I was talking about Ring Out Wild Bells as a social document, how it represents the plight of the people, the plight of English society of that time. So, Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, which came out in 1859, it shook the faith of English people because Darwin wrote that man is a product of evolution and he is not a creation of God but a creation of a long extended evolution, and man has originated or developed from monkeys, and so it shook the faith of people. In Bible, they began to raise doubts against religion, against their spiritual learnings, against the spiritual religious order, and science was doing wonders. And another problem in society was the rich-poor divide. Society at that time was sharply divided into rich and the poor. The poor were largely illiterate and so inarticulate. They were not in a position to express themselves, but they were dissatisfied. The cultured were a class apart. They took little interest in the lives of the poor until they were forced to do so. Modern sociologists have drawn lurid pictures of the conditions of the working classes. And during the early part of the last century, overpopulation and fluctuation in price were the main causes of this misery. But the situation was worsened by some other historical movements and historical happenings. For example, Irish potato famine, which took place in 1845, and then the hungry and the naked, supported by Cobden and Bright, Peel, Gladstone, by these people, they were attempting to get their miseries alleviated. So this is what is meant by the phrase the feud of rich and poor, and the efforts of these people means Cobden, Bright, Peel, Gladstone. Their efforts produced the Poor Law, which came out in 1844. The Factory Law then came out in 1833, and then came out the Reform Bill in 1832, and the repeal of Corn Law occurred in 1846. So these things also were, we can say, doing some political interventions, but much was yet to be done, and hence Tennyson prays for in the phrase the redress to all mankind. This naturally aroused the jealousy of other classes, and party politics intervened and assumed a fiercer aspect. Ancient forms of party strife, this is what is meant by this phrase, and the two parties means the Tories on the one hand and the Whigs on the other hand. They resorted to all sorts of idle pamphleteering. So pamphleteering as a political practice was also in vogue. The journals were mouthpieces of one party or the other. So this is what is meant by the phrase the civic slender and the spite. The Victorians cared more for outward forms of worship than the truth and frankness. Tennyson, a child of his age, naturally longs for the nobler modes of life with sweeter manners and the common love of good. Their rapid progress brought in its wake extreme departmental inefficiency, and the administration of law greatly suffered. One side of Westminster Hall gave judgments which the other side restrained and the successful party from enforcing. The bewildered litigant was driven backwards and forwards, hence Tennyson's desire for purer laws. That is why he writes this phrase, purer laws. Among other evils, there were many other problems as well in the English society of that time. For example, slave trade and plague as a disease, and of course the war was also going at that time with on various fronts, on different fronts, and the major front at that time against England was of the French dictator of that time, Napoleon Bonaparte. And the first attempt to root out the slave trade was made in 1808, but it was not till 1833 that it was crushed out. So that is why Tennyson writes here the phrase slowly dying cause. And Jenner's discovery of vaccination in 1798 and the draining of marshes greatly stopped mortality by plague, but they were still widespread and showed the imperfection of our medical science. And that is why Tennyson writes old shapes of foul disease. But it is to be critically discussed that medical science is never perfect. It is always in the process of development. For example, recently we have been facing this problem, novel coronavirus COVID-19. So we have no solution for it, and scientists are still trying to make a vaccine against this disease. But still, it is in the process of formation. It is in the process of to be perfectly made, and it will take some more time, I think. So it can be said that medical science is always in a state of development. But then there were some other problems. England was facing some other problems, for example, Opium War against China and the Crimean War against Russia, and the rivalry between England and France was also a political problem of that time. And that is why Tennyson writes the phrase, the thousand wars of old. So Tennyson, as a poet, writes about the plight of the people, the plight of the nation, the social condition, the problems of the English people of that time. And he wanted a more just society, a society where there was no rich-poor divide, no major difference between rich and poor classes on the level of social benefits. And he also wanted a safer and securer nation. And the shaking religious faith was also a spiritual problem before him. So that is why he writes about all these things in memoriam, and that is what is represented by this shorter passage, or we can say shorter poem within in memoriam, Ring Out Wild Bells. So I hope you must have enjoyed it, and I would suggest you to please read it out from any textbook that you have, and also please discuss it with your friends. So thank you for listening.